This video is sponsored by Card Kingdom. If you click on the link in the description below, it'll take you to their store and they'll know I sent you there. Hi everyone, I'm Nighthawk, and it's Friday, so that means it's time for another MTG Top 10, the series where I rank cards based on their historical performance at Magic's highest level of competition. At this point, I've made 337 MTG Top 10s dating all the way back to February of 2016. I've been doing this for so long that sometimes old lists need to be revisited because they have changed so substantially, and that's what we're doing today. This video is a 2021 update for the Deathtouch keyword, a topic I covered back in August of 2017. Deathtouch makes it so that if a creature does damage to another creature in any way, it dies. A Deathtouch creature is a real pain whether you're the one attacking or blocking, and it makes it so that any creature can trade with any other creature. It originally debuted in Future Sight, and it has been an evergreen keyword for a long time, meaning that we see several cards with it in every single set. It appears the most frequently on black and green cards. To be eligible for this list, a card had to have Deathtouch, give Deathtouch, or create a creature token that had Deathtouch. All in all, there were 245 cards eligible for this list. Before we get started, here's a quick reminder on how I score cards for these videos. A top 8 at a Pro Tour, Players Tour, Mythic Championship, Mythic Invitational, Legacy, or Vintage Championship is worth 2 points, and a top 8 at a Magic Fest or Grand Prix is worth 1 point. So while this video is mostly going to focus on the top 10, when I revisit topics, I like to look at the cards that have fallen off the list, so we're going to start there. 4 of the cards that made the 2017 list aren't on this one, so let's start with those. So first, let's look at Vault of the Archangel, which made the 2017 list with 21 points. This is a nice utility land. It grants 2 pretty good keywords to all of your creatures. Deathtouch makes it so your opponent is probably reluctant to block, and if they do, you can really hurt them. And Lifelink makes it hard for your opponent to win a race. While the Vault had some success in Standard and Modern between 2012 and 2016, it hasn't put up any points since the last video, and that's why it fell off the list. Hornet Nest also fell off the 2021 version of the list. In 2017, it was number 9. The nest doesn't have Deathtouch itself. It would be kind of silly if it did, since it's just a nest, but very flavorfully, if the nest is disturbed in any way, or damaged, it produces Deathtouch insect tokens with flying. A token with those keywords is no joke. If you're ahead, you can use the tokens to pressure your opponent, and if you're behind, you can use them to hold your opponent at bay. While it had significant success in Standard and even put up a couple of Modern points, it hasn't gained any points since the 2017 video. Grave Titan also fell off of the 2021 list after coming in at number 8 in 2017. Like all the Titans, this guy is a 6-mana 6/6 with a color-appropriate keyword, Deathtouch in this case. All of the Titans also have an Enter the Battlefield and attack trigger that does the same thing. In this case, the Titan spits out zombie tokens. If Grave Titan isn't stopped, he and his zombie army will easily take over a game. Like the other cards that fell off of this list, Grave Titan is pointless since the last one. Vampire Nighthawk is the 4th and final card to fall off of the 2017 list. The Nighthawk comes packed with nice keywords: Flying for evasiveness, Deathtouch if you find yourself needing to be defensive, and Lifelink to make it hard for your opponent to race you. However, even with all those keywords, the Nighthawk also hasn't been played at all since the 2017 video. Alright, so those are the 4 cards from the 2017 list that didn't make it this time. Now let's dive into the top 10. At number 10, it's Death Mist Raptor. In 2017, the Raptor was at number 5, so it has had a pretty steep drop. This is because it hasn't been played anywhere since rotating out of Standard. Still, its impressive showing in Standard is enough for it to stay on this list for now. The Raptor makes great use of Deathtouch, since it is a Deathtouch creature who doesn't stay in the graveyard very long. It has a super powerful morph payoff, since it just comes back to the board with its 3/3 Deathtouch body anytime you turn a permanent face up. Those stats are enough to really pressure your opponent, especially on a creature that has such an easy-to-activate recursion. The Raptor helps spawn an entire deck built around the morph mechanic called Green-White Megamorph, which was quite successful in Standard. Having a creature like the Raptor who just refuses to stay dead is a pretty good way to grind out a win, especially when you combine it with the other frightening green Megamorph creature, Den Protector. The 2 of them provided the deck with some serious value. It was a pretty good inclusion even in decks that didn't have that many morph creatures too, especially if the other one you have is Den Protector, since it has reasonable stats to begin with. So, in addition to those Megamorph decks, it was also played in Dragon Control, Devotion to Green, Collected Company, and Abzan. However, if it doesn't pick up some points soon, it won't be on this list when I check back in a few years. At number 9, it is Hornet Queen. She was number 7 on the 2017 list, so she did drop a couple of spots. However, she has gained 2 points since then, and that was enough to keep her on the list. The Queen's Enter the Battlefield ability makes a bunch of flying Deathtouch tokens. Those bodies represent a very quick clock, or they can help you fend off your opponent's creatures. Because she costs a whopping 7 mana, she really only works in decks that have ways to get her into play quickly. While in Standard, she was played in Whip of Erebos reanimation decks, where she fit in perfectly. The Whip only lets you reanimate a creature for a turn, but that's fine in this case, thanks to those creature tokens that will stay behind. She also gained a few Standard points in Mono Green Devotion. Hornet Queen has some points in Modern, where she's been featured in the sideboard of Amulet Titan decks. Those decks use Amulet of Vigor to produce a ton of mana with bounce lands, and normally their plan is to use that mana to quickly cast Primeval Titan, but Hornet Queen can be brought in from the sideboard against more aggressive decks, where you need to make sure to get your shields up before you're able to pull off a quick kill with the Titan. She provides so many Deathtouch bodies that any creature-based deck has a difficult time finding a way through the horde of insects. Even though the deck only runs a singleton copy, it also runs Summoner's Pact, which allows you to search up the Queen against decks where she's really needed. She doesn't have any points since 2019, but I feel like she'll probably gain a few more over the next few years. At number 8, it is Baleful Strix, the first newcomer to this list. At the time of the last video, the Strix had 20 points, so it's gained 15 points since then, allowing it to make this list over cards that were idle over the last few years. The Strix is one of my favorite cards in all of Magic, and it's super good. A creature with evasion, Deathtouch, and a cantrip effect is just great, and always going to give you a 2-for-1. Part of the reason the Strix didn't quite make it last time is because it was never legal in Standard or Modern. It was printed in a supplemental set, which has made it be legal only in Legacy and Vintage. That means it was a bit slower to put up points than cards with Standard legality, but it has some serious power, enough that it is a heavily played card in Legacy control decks, so it's going to continue to accumulate points in the coming years. At number 7, it is Gandhi, Lord of Luxury, another newcomer to the list. Gandhi existed when the last video was made, but he'd only been around for a few months and he had 14 points. Gandhi has gained 26 points since that list was made, easily making the list this time around. Gandhi's kind of similar to Baleful Strix in that, like the Strix, he usually represents a 2-for-1. His Enter the Battlefield trigger is a powerful one, since it lets you steal the best card of your opponent's top 4, so he gives you way more card selection than the Strix does. Then, by having Deathtouch, it means your opponent either has to attack into it and have it trade, or use a removal spell. One of the best things about Gandhi is that even if your opponent does get rid of it, you still get to keep the card to use whenever you want. So far, all of Gandhi's points have come in Standard. Any black deck, apart from the most aggressive ones, tended to play Gandhi while he was in Standard. This included control decks and mid-range Delirium decks the most frequently. At number 6, it is Dragon Lord Silengar, which dropped 2 spots from its number 4 position on the 2017 list. This flying Deathtoucher has a super powerful Enter the Battlefield ability that lets you just snatch your opponent's best creature or planeswalker. And your opponent does get the card back if they take care of Silengar, but the impact it has on the game is just absolutely massive. In addition to just being a powerful card on the face of it, Silengar got an extra boost in the Standard of the time thanks to the heavily played Gideon, ally of Zendikar. Gideon virtually always just used his 0 loyalty ability to spit out night tokens. With Silengar, you could steal Gideon and use his ultimate right away, so that your board gets a permanent boost and your opponent won't be getting their Gideon back even if they kill Silengar. Silengar was pretty close to a staple in mid-range and control decks playing both blue and black while it was in Standard, but it's gained 0 points since the 2017 list, and it figures to continue to move down this list over the next few years. At number 5, it's Questing Beast. It's the only card on this list that didn't even exist when I made the 2017 version. Questing Beast has an infamously full text box with all kinds of abilities, and Deathtouch is in there somewhere. Because the beast also has haste and vigilance, this makes it particularly challenging to deal with. You can't just sit back and let it hit you and try to race, because vigilance means this thing will still be able to block. Because it has haste, it often has a good attack the turn it comes down, and then Deathtouch means that if you want to kill it, you're going to have to use a card or two. This is all augmented by the good stats, the fact it can't be blocked by small creatures, and the fact it lets you go after planeswalkers when you do combat damage to an opponent, not to mention the fact that it doesn't allow your opponent to prevent combat damage. Questing Beast has already been played in multiple formats, and that's part of why it's been able to put up 40 points, despite being significantly newer than every other card on this list. It has turned out to be well suited for aggro decks in Standard, Pioneer, Historic, Modern, and Legacy. It's still legal in Standard too, so it won't be surprising to see it move up this list significantly over the next few years. At number 4, it is Garrick Relentless, who has dropped 1 spot since 2017. This Planeswalker is one of the more interesting designs we've ever seen. On the Garrick Relentless side, you have a Planeswalker who can churn out wolf tokens. He can also do 3 damage to a creature, which is enough to kill a lot of things. Now, The creature he damages also damages him, which is kind of downside, but the upside there is if Garrick can lower his loyalty counters, like, by using that first ability, he flips into Garrick the Veil Cursed. Now, that does mean if a creature has more than 2 power in most cases, you're out of luck, but it is still crazy upside. Garrick the Veil Cursed is where the Deathtouch part comes in. His +1 makes Deathtouch wolves, and we've already seen in this video that Deathtouch creature tokens are a pretty powerful thing. He has other powerful abilities too. His -1 lets you tutor up a creature if you sacrifice a creature. His -3 is an overrun effect, and that goes really well with all those Deathtouch wolves. Garrick was heavily played in green decks in both block and standard, and he even gained a few points in modern and legacy, but he hasn't gained any points since 2017. At number 3, it is Acidic Slime, which fell a single spot to number 3. Like a lot of the Deathtouchers on this list, Deathtouch helps Acidic Slime to be a 2-for-1. It has an Into the Battlefield ability that can kill a wide variety of permanents, so that takes care of one card, and then Deathtouch means your opponent will probably have to use up another card to kill the slime itself, one way or another. Acidic Slime gained all of its points in Standard, a format it had some extra time in thanks to 4 separate core set reprints in M10, M11, M12, and M15. It has mostly been a sideboard card, one that could deal with dominant cards in formats like Valakut Molten Pinnacle or Birthing Pod, as well as the various equipment played in Cobblade decks. If Acidic Slime were reprinted, it would stand a good chance of being played in Standard again, but until that happens, I don't think it's that likely it gains more points. At number 2, it's the final newcomer to the list, Hissing Quagmire, a creature land that has Deathtouch when it becomes a creature. The Quagmire was around at the time of the 2017 list, and from what I can tell, it should have actually made the list at number 10 with 25 points. Evidently, I screwed up somewhere back in 2017. In the time since that video, it has more than doubled its points with 54 now. Creature lands are nice, especially 2-colored ones since they fix for you. Then in the late game, they can become relevant creatures. A 2/2 Deathtouch isn't the best attacker ever, but hey, in the late game, it gives you a source of damage or a creature to block with, and it's also immune to sorcery speed removal. And most lands by that part of the game are doing absolutely nothing, so that's a pretty big upgrade. Basically, every black-green deck in Standard played it, and that's where it gained most of its points, but part of the reason that it has gained so many points since 2017 is that it started to see play in the rock decks in Modern, which are basically black-green mid-range decks. It didn't gain any points in 2020 or 2021 so far, but there have been way fewer Modern events than usual, so once things get back to normal, I imagine it will get back to adding to its score. And at number 1, it is Wurmcoil Engine, which holds on to its spot on this list by a margin of almost 40 points. And it didn't do it by resting on its laurels either. It's gained 40 points since the 2017 list. We've talked about a lot of creatures with Deathtouch that can give you some other value, resulting in a 2-for-1. Well, Wurmcoil Engine can go farther than that. Not only is it a huge creature with lifelink and Deathtouch, when it dies, it also makes 2 3/3 tokens, one of which also has Deathtouch. Dealing with Wurmcoil Engine is no joke, and if you don't have a way to exile it or otherwise deal with it without actually killing it, you'll probably lose. While it was played in Standard, it has really excelled in Modern, where there are several decks that can put it into play super early. Tron decks can do it on turn 3, as can decks running Bounce Lands and Amulet of Vigor. Wurmcoil Engine is hard enough to deal with when it comes down late, so it coming into play on turn 3 is a real nightmare. In addition to seeing a ton of play in Modern over the years, it has also added to its score in Magic's most powerful format, Vintage, where it sees a lot of play in Mud, a mono artifact deck that specializes in producing tons of colorless mana, so you can see why the engine is played there. Wurmcoil Engine probably won't be slowing down anytime soon, and I imagine that if I revisit this list in 2024 or whatever, it'll still be number 1. Well, those are the 10 cards with Deathtouch that have left the biggest impact on competitive Magic. If you're interested in owning any of these cards, in the description you'll find a direct link to each of them in Card Kingdom's store. If you want to make sure you catch future MTG Top 10s, subscribe and turn on notifications, and if you need to catch up on the ones I've already done, you should see the playlist on your screen now. Thanks for watching.